Welcome to NYC Now, your source for local news in and around New York City. From WNYC, it's Thursday, September 18th. Here's the midday news from Veronica Del Valle.
A Texas man has been arrested on charges of harassing and making a terroristic threat against New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani. The Democratic nominee is considered the frontrunner in the November election. Jeremy Fistel was arrested yesterday in Plano, Texas, by the NYPD's Hate Crimes Task Force. A police official says he's been brought back to the city, where he faces 1 count of making a terrorist threat and 3 counts of aggravated harassment. Fistel pleaded not guilty to the charges in a court appearance this morning. Most tickets from the city's Pedicab Crackdown aren't sticking. WNYC's Charles Lane reports.
The enforcement push targeted unlicensed pedicab drivers who are sometimes accused of tourist scams and loud music in Midtown. But court data shows fewer than 10% of tickets resulted in any penalty. Jacob Uriel is a former Brooklyn prosecutor who now defends people charged with low-level offenses. He says the system isn't working.
Where's the incentive to actually get the license? If it's more expensive and more cumbersome than a couple of tickets here and there.
The crackdown drew renewed scrutiny after pedicab driver Musa Seton died by suicide in a police precinct in August following his arrest for failing to appear in court. According to the NYPD, he's one of 9 people who've died in police custody so far this year.
Right now, it is beautiful outside, 75 and sunny. Today, mostly sunny, and it's going to get quite warm, a high near 82 with some light winds. Tonight, temperatures in the mid-60s. And tomorrow, sunny with a high of 83. Saturday and Sunday, low 70s.
Stay close. There's more after the break.
NYC.
I'm Sean Carlson for WNYC. It's time for Politics Brief, our weekly segment where we break down the news out of City Hall and across New York State. And there was quite a lot this week. Zohran Mamdani is getting new endorsements. Andrew Cuomo apparently doesn't know any good living Democrats. We'll get there in a minute. And Brad Lander may have gotten ahead of himself talking about his next job. To explain all of it, we're joined by WNYC's Jimmy Vielkind up in Albany and Brigid Bergin here in downtown Manhattan. All right, Jimmy, we're going to start with you. Some big state leaders are getting behind Mamdani this week. Tell us, who's endorsing him and what do they say about why?
Well, the biggest name is Governor Hochul. This helps her, I think, as much as it helps Mamdani. You know, she's facing an election next year, and here she gets an alliance with someone who's energized progressive Democrats in New York City. At the same time, though, you know, there's a possibility of a counter-reaction that turns off moderates and independents. But we'll see. She had a kind of a closer than expected race 4 years ago, and hopefully this will be easier. For Mamdani, this kind of shows that the Democratic establishment is closing the door on Cuomo and Mayor Eric Adams. It also means that Mamdani's not going to have a foe, but rather someone who could be kind of a partner for him in Albany. You know, of course, we know New York City is the center of the world, but a lot of the things that government wants to do goes through Albany. Today, Mamdani also got the nod from Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie. He's another of the 3 people in the room that sit there with a meat grinder and a pile of gizzards to make New York signature sausage. Excuse me, their laws and budgets.
Okay, all right.
So graphic, Jimmy.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of being the center of the world, I mean, you know, New York City, we think of ourselves that way, except for when we want to do things like, I don't know, raise taxes or something. And so many of Mamdani's big plans will require approval from the state legislature. You know, I think it's clear that these endorsements seem like good politics now, but are you ready to say it's clear sailing for his agenda?
Positively not. No guarantees, none at all.
Okay.
You know, Governor Hochul was asked about this, and she stressed that there's still lots of disagreement between her and Mamdani earlier this week. Take a listen to what she said.
Yeah, I disagree with many statements, and I've said that. But also, I believe that we need someone who's going to be open-minded and optimistic and have an attitude, a can-do attitude that I share about knowing that the city's best days still do lie ahead.
You know, Brigid, I think we have to watch pretty closely for the next few months and see how this goes. It's pretty telling to me that when he was asked, Mamdani didn't then turn around and endorse Hochul for election. You know, we talked about how she could benefit here too. So I think that sets up a dynamic where if she wants his endorsement, we're going to have to see what she's able to deliver in terms of legislative action on his agenda.
Yeah, I mean, but I also think it's a little premature to read anything into Mamdani not endorsing Hochul yet, because he's the one with an election this fall. Mm-hmm. And I think she probably wants to see what kind of coattails he actually ends up having next year, assuming he wins.
Yeah. Well, with all due respect to the governors who might be listening to this program right now, is this actually going to have that big of an impact on the race? Like, how many people are sitting there saying, boy, I wonder what Kathy Hochul thinks about the New York City mayor's race?
Well, okay, so probably they may not be waiting for her to make their decisions, but, Eric Adams this week said that Hochul's endorsement was worth just one vote, which I think gave some people a chuckle since she's registered to vote in Buffalo, so ultimately it's not even worth that. Certainly, Mamdani's leading opponent has tried to downplay the significance of these endorsements. Here's a little from Andrew Cuomo at a press event I was at yesterday.
I don't believe these political endorsements amount to anything at the end of the day. Look, in the primary, I had all the political endorsements, right? Doesn't make a difference.
And he did have all that support, and it ultimately did not, because he did not have the support of all the voters. I do think there was something interesting about her decision to announce her endorsement in a New York Times editorial as opposed to standing with the candidate somewhere side by side, the way we saw Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie do today up in the Bronx. That is as much to me about sending a message and a signal to members of her party, a national audience, about how they can thread the needle and endorse without saying they agree with all of his positions.
Yeah, and Brigid, we immediately saw a response from a lot of the Republicans here, including Hochul's potential rival, Elise Stefanik. She was on social media saying that Hochul was a communist and that she now owns all the positions that Mamdani and the DSA have ever taken.
Now, folks, we've talked about how there was a trio of big endorsers who hadn't embraced Mamdani. So what happens to U.S. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries?
We're still waiting to hear from them. Jeffries has said to stay tuned, that, he isn't talking to other mayoral candidates, but obviously he and Schumer are pretty busy right now. If you're listening to NPR, you know that there is this federal funding talks going on in Washington, a looming potential shutdown. Mm-hmm. There are some signals that others in New York may be shifting to support Mamdani. Annie Carney of the New York Times tweeted earlier this week that Brooklyn Representative Yvette Clarke was poised to endorse Mamdani next week. Now her district is right next door to Jeffries, so something to definitely watch there. But we also have to remember that, Jeffries and Schumer, they're looking way ahead. They're trying to win national elections in 2026. And there's some concern in suburban areas where majorities are won and lost about Mamdani's brand.
Yeah, like I said, Stefanik's reaction was really emblematic of how Republicans are just going nuts about this. Mm-hmm. President Trump himself threatened to withhold federal funding from New York. So it's a pretty sharp turn in the relationship with Hochul that had, I would say, been going reasonably well. We don't also know whether any of this is going to bring independents, centrists, and even some Republicans away from Democrats. That's something that could have a bigger effect on Hochul than either Jeffries or Schumer. And we'll see whether it's the pain is worth the gain when it comes to the boost from progressives.
Now, Brigid, you have a story about some of the shine coming off the relationship between Mamdani and Brad Lander. Folks might remember that he was a critical endorser in the last days before the primary. What happened?
Well, Liz Kim and I reported that in the period right after the primary, the Mamdani campaign was starting to hear about some instances where Lander had made some comments that people interpreted to mean that he expected to be part of the Mamdani administration, first deputy mayor. And sources told us that Mamdani called Lander before his wedding trip to Uganda to tell him, dial it back, that there were no agreements or decisions that had been made yet.
Brigid, is that actually like a problem? I mean, I could remember talking to people after the primary just saying speculatively, like, man, I bet Brad Lander could be the Dick Cheney of the Mamdani administration, or just have all the power, be the power behind the throne. He could basically name his job. And I assume that he'll still have some prominent home if he wants it, right?
I mean, I think one would have to think so. Lander is the city controller, formidable figure in progressive and democratic politics. He's deeply respected for his policy chops. His campaign gave us a statement dismissing this reporting. He called it gossip and said he's committed to helping Mamdani win. Mamdani told reporters today that they talk all the time. But I think what made the story so important to us is that people are really interested in what is happening with what may be a new administration, what may be a Mamdani administration, certainly given his lack of age, or given his age and lack of city government experience. So, my takeaway from our reporting was that Mamdani wanted to make it clear that no decisions had been made.
Yeah. Well, we have to leave it there. We are just about out of time. That's Politics Brief from the WNYC Politics team. WNYC's Brigid Bergin here in the city and Jimmy Vielkind in Albany. Keep tuning in, folks. My friends, thanks so much.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for listening. This is NYC Now from WNYC. Check us out for updates every weekday, 3 times a day for the latest news headlines and occasional deep dives. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back this evening.